Now, please join me in welcoming on stage Mr. Martin Hayes, President, Southeast Asia for Robert Bosch, and Vice Chairman of the EU-ABC for the welcome address. Mr. Hayes, please.
Distinguished guests, ladies, and I do see a few gentlemen in my midst, and also to all of you watching it online. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the EU-ASEAN Business Council's inaugural Women in Leadership Summit, where we hope to advance the gender equality at the workplace, and particularly at the leadership level. ASEAN is fragmented when it comes to women's rights and gender equality at the workplace, and in particular due to social, economic, and cultural issues, but also the effectiveness of implementing legislations and public policies. And in the private sector, there is much we can do in playing a part in closing the gender gap. We can enact hiring, advancement, and support policies on our own volition, independent of local government or the backing of. For instance, we could set out ourselves targets to achieve a certain percentage of female leaders at a certain time. The assumption is that the targets are realistic and that based on industry norms and the talent pool available. So if I may use Bosch, where I am from, for an illustration. Bosch is an innovative company, and diversity, which includes gender diversity, is a cornerstone to achieve our Invented for Life mantra. We don't want to achieve or surpass industry norms for diversity's sake. Instead, we recognize and seek the value that diversity brings to the innovation table. As a diversified company operating in multiple industries, we are at the heart an engineering and technology-led company, an industry that remains male-dominated at generally 80%. And we have a target to reach 25% of women in leadership gradually by 2030. This is the tone from the top. And in ASEAN, I'm very pleased that I have 23% of women in leadership positions in 2021, and I will hit the target of 25% in the next year. And we continue to surpass this figure in the following years. Furthermore, we are already seeing strong representation of female leaders in some of our key automotive and technology-centric trade divisions, which is ranging from 30 to 50%, which is an encouraging sign. However, I cannot stress enough that this means getting there is more crucial than the end itself. Companies hiring to meet the numbers will face negative effects of backlash, such as being accused of tokenism. It will be a huge regressive step away from gender equality, however well-intended the action was, because trust with employees is lost, both males and females in their own ways. And at Bosch, one of the measures that we've mandated is that all senior management positions, as a standard in our staffing process to ensure gender diversity, the emphasis here is on consideration. It must be fair consideration where the decision is then based on merit, which is sincerely, I hope, will be the case always. And that leads me on to my next point about unconscious bias. We need constantly challenge the existing social mindsets and the beliefs that hinder fairness and equality. And for instance, will a stay-at-home father returning to the workplace face the same issues as a mother who placed her career on temporary hold to care for her family? At Bosch, we have introduced trainings on unconscious bias to all employees and are looking into making this mandatory for all management levels. And this, I believe, is a positive step to overcoming a hurdle that is innately human. We need to level the playing field where women are assessed and advanced, paid and empowered equally to men. I have 3 daughters. One I know is listening online. And I would be very infuriated if they were treated unjustly at the workplace. I can hope that this is a sentiment shared with other men and also women in the leadership positions who can and will effect change within their organizations. I hope you are the ones, and I hope that this is why you're all here today. So we will be discussing these issues and more across today's program by our lineup of esteemed speakers. Keep pressing on. Make your voices heard, and I look forward to a lively and fruitful discussion that lead to the greater inclusiveness for women in leadership. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Now, please join me in welcoming on stage Her Excellency Ivona Piroko, Ambassador to Singapore, to give her opening remarks. Your Excellency, please.
Hello, everybody here and online. I don't know where is the online there. It's really my pleasure to be here and to address you today, and it's even bigger pleasure to be the first woman to speak. So the, let's say, weight of responsibility is heavy on my arms, I have to say. I would like to thank very much the Council and Chris is a very inspiring leader, male leader, but still very inspiring, for inviting me and for the possibility to address you today briefly. So ladies and gentlemen, and there are not so very few, including my colleagues, some ambassadors from the EU. I'd like to start by a very sober note. As you know, we all live very, very difficult times, but those that live them most harshly are far away, are in Ukraine. Far away geographically, but I hope not in all other terms. My thoughts, and I'm sure also yours, go out to families in Ukraine who are showing immense courage, both those women that decided to flee with their children in a very brave way. We hear stories of heroism that inspire both on that way, also those that stay to defend their homeland and fight for universal values of freedom. These women and girls are not alone and should never be. This is really a defining moment where we see the whole free world speaking with one voice, also about those women. That leads me to my second point, also about war. Women and girls are in general, during wars, the most vulnerable to exploitation and violence. And we all collectively need to ensure that their rights and their safety is upheld also in these tragic circumstances. However, at the same time, when you look at the basic statistics, we really need to ensure meaningful participation of women in peace and security efforts. It is striking to see that women are usually the first victims, but at the same time, they take such a small part in official peacemaking processes. According to UN statistics, for instance, they obtain very big results. When you have women participating in peacemaking process, the resulting agreements are usually 35% more likely to last 15 years or longer. However, at the same time, there is very few of them taking part. According to Council of Foreign Relations, for over 30 years, between 1992 and 2019, women constituted on average only 13% of negotiators, 6% of mediators, 6% of signatories of all major peace processes around the world. These are very, very small figures. Now, maybe closer to the heart to our subject, to business, but the situation is only a little bit better. Also in economy, in business, women are underrepresented. Obviously, the situation is better each day, but the path to go is still quite long. And all the statistics, again, show very clearly that when you have women included in leadership roles, companies profit. I'm sure you are all aware of a lot of statistics and studies, for instance, a recent study by McKinsey that shows that companies with gender-diverse leadership are 21% more likely to financially outperform their competitors. Frankly, if you look at this, be it in security, in business, in any other area, gender equality is possible when there is a political will and when there is a clear political vision to progress. Will alone is not sufficient. You need to have a vision, a roadmap. I come here directly from a lunch, a working lunch among women diplomats in Singapore. I see some of my colleagues, Michaela from Czech Republic, I think some others, Sandra from Denmark here, they were there as well. You know, we are very few here. We are around 14, 15 from all the countries. I think this number should really grow. Yes, I'm very proud that half of them are from the European Union, 7 of them, and even more from Europe, broadly speaking. We have our wonderful, very brave colleague from Ukraine, Katerina. We have a very good colleague from UK, Kara. So it's true, most of these diplomats, women diplomats, are from Europe, but it's still just 7. There should be more, and I really, truly hope this will be the case very soon. I asked them, what should I tell you from them and in general? And they told me, tell your own story. Tell a bit about yourself. That's always highly embarrassing, so this will be short. But yes, I was born in the 70s in Poland under communist regime. And if you would have told anybody, including my parents or myself at that time, that I would be representing the European Union in 2021 in Singapore, they would have had a good laugh, I have to say. So here I am, fulfilling this role as well as I can, certainly quite proud. But one of the main reasons this has worked, apart from big politics of this world, is the support I've always had from my family, from my parents, talking about males, also very much from my brother, who has stayed on with my parents, and obviously nowadays from my husband and my daughter that doesn't complain too much, she never sees me. And that has been the case for all her life, sort of. So that's very important. I myself have rarely felt limited in what I can do because I'm a woman. But I acknowledge how different my life would have been in other circumstances. Same at work, I really have been privileged to be exposed daily to wonderful female leadership examples, having worked for former Chief Foreign Policy Mogherini or Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Verstager, where you really can learn female leadership by day, and I'm very grateful for these lessons. Many women in the world, however, are not so fortunate, and I take really as my absolute duty, and I think all of us do, to speak precisely for these women. We must, for them, speak and act. We at the European Union, both at the member states level and the EU institutions, are trying to lead by example as much as we can. The President, Ursula von der Leyen, is committed to achieving gender parity at all levels of the Commission in management functions by 2024, and we are getting there. Already at the highest level is really half-half. The same for other institutions. Actually, most of EU institutions nowadays are led by women, and that's a political choice. A very difficult one, and many years of efforts have led to it. But we are getting there. Last March, precisely before the International Women's Day, we adopted a new gender equality strategy for 2020-2024. I was asked to say a couple of words about this that maybe can inspire someone here or there. This gender equality strategy is very comprehensive and addresses a number of critical issues that currently undermine equality, opportunity, potential in society, such as work-life balance, pay transparency, gender pay gap, violence against women, and gender balance in decision-making. Martin from Bosch has mentioned this. Indeed, without quantitative targets, it's just not possible. So we will be and are supporting measures that include quantitative targets for female appointments in leadership, but also we create leadership development programs. So quality is there where needed as well. These are big things, but it's also important to remember smaller things, like having women always present in panels, not only during International Women's Day or related events. I have to congratulate Chris again on that, because I've hardly ever been in your event where that wouldn't be the case. Important things where we can ensure everybody's voice is heard. Same for European governments. Quite a number of them are led by women nowadays. And in general, as we spoke, the participation of women in the workforce is rising steadily. So although the gender gap is there for closing, it is still, though, far from ideal, as we all know. There are obviously several causes for this underrepresentation of women in the decision-making process, and they are not at all that simple. They are multiple and complex, actually. Yes, they include traditional gender roles and stereotypes, but also lack of support for women and men to balance care responsibilities with work. I remember how tough it was for my husband 14 years ago to be one of the first men in the European Commission to actually take parental leave for a short time, and really one of the first, thinking how it will be to return. And not only he returned very successfully, but he's become my daughter has become daddy's daughter until today, I'm afraid. So such investments are very, very important, but it's important to have support for them. From my own journey, the main lesson I have learned probably is that you need to work very, very hard, that everybody will tell you, but you also need to work smart. This is an important combination. What do I mean? Of course, I have to be careful as EU ambassador when I pick one country as an example, so I decided to choose the one whose ambassador is not here and who is successful in this area, and that's the Netherlands. If you look at the figures there, women are 58% of the workforce, and 63% of them work part-time. And still, they manage to achieve gender parity in government, and they have considerably lowered the pay gap compared to other countries. And they have done so working part-time and flex time. So it is possible. I've been asked, finally, to give a couple of personal pieces of advice for women, women road to leadership. This is obviously very tricky. I feel too humble to do so, and also I have not had them myself, but I've been asked, so I've tried to come with something. I'd say one needs to really aim high, don't be too modest, not to be arrogant, but believe in yourself. it's funny to note in all the statistics that women usually apply for jobs, be it leadership jobs or even lower, only when they fulfill around 90% of criteria. And apparently men, at least according to my readings, do so even if they feel a few. They just feel the courage to do so. So, I mean, let's believe in ourselves. My advice would be also to be authentic. There are various schools on this. Very often as a woman being authentic, you will be accused of all kinds of things. But I still think it's important not to be afraid to express your opinions honestly, and from the start, make decisions that align with your values, what you believe in. Be confident. It's a bit the same as first. Set boundaries and stand up for your voice. And find inspiration in very different people. It can be men or women, can change over time, but try to always have someone that supports you or that uplifts you or that inspires you. And build your team. That's very important. Nobody has all the skills you need, right? So you have to complement it by other people's skills and vice versa. And create your network that grows over years, because only then you can learn other things, other trends, other opportunities, and so on. And when you finally are in leadership position, and here I think in this room many are, leadership can mean very different things. It can mean student organization, job in private company, public, I mean, it can be a lot of things. But don't forget where you come from and put these issues on top of your agenda. We all need to help maybe younger girls to get what they want to get, but also our own employees to develop their skills, to motivate them to be dedicated and creative, and not to lose track of their own journeys and our own journey. And finally, that's my really final word, we have to be mindful of how we talk to boys and girls about opportunities. So, as Martin has said, we don't create unconscious bias at a young age. Equality clearly concerns both women and men. And actually here, and I'm sure online, I'm speaking to those convinced men. The men that have made their time to be here are those that believe in these issues and share these beliefs. Both in Europe and in Singapore, there are men that have taken up significant roles in promoting equal opportunities, economic independence for women, closing gender pay gap, advancing gender balance in decision-making, and sharing equally in the distribution of power and influence. This is why initiatives like this and discussions like this are ever so important for us to reflect jointly. So that leaves me only with wishing you a really meaningful debate later today. Thank you very much once again for having me.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now, please join me in welcoming on stage Dr. Deborah Elms, founder and executive director at the Asian Trade Center, to give her keynote speech.
How do you follow that? I feel a little like a comedian who once said that he had a job, an unenviable job, of having to be a keynote at a cancer benefit. And so after all of these like heart-wrenching stories about cancer treatment and patients and so forth, then he had to get up and try to convince people to laugh. So, that's a difficult challenge. Fortunately, Chris didn't ask me to do this because of my comedic skills, or I would really be in trouble. But it's just a challenge, right? We're talking about war, and we're talking about extremely depressing figures for women's participation in all sorts of ways. And then to give a speech at a women's leadership discussion about where we go from there, I think is tough. And I think it represents perhaps the challenge that women have in general, which is how do you balance conflicting desires, right? To be a comedian and to be, serious and present in the moment. So let me talk a little bit about my opportunity. This was an odd request, to be honest. I mean, I've never done a women in leadership event, and when I got the invitation from Chris, I thought, wow, I was kind of flattered. That's sort of fascinating. I've not had that before. And then I thought, what the heck am I going to say? Like, wow, this is not my area. This is not what I do. There's got to be better women than me. Somebody out there must be a better speaker. They marinate in this information all the time. They have ready recall of these facts and statistics. So I thought, wow, I mean, as flattered as I am, I don't think I can actually deliver this address because this is just a little too far out of my comfort zone. So I sat down and I hit reply all, thanks, but. And then I paused and I thought, actually, let's think about that for a second. I'm being asked to speak about women in leadership. And how do you get to be in leadership if you only say yes to things that are directly in your comfort zone, right? You're never going to be a leader if you constantly say no to opportunities that push you in new directions, that ask you to do things that you, frankly, you're not sure you're ready for. You're convinced that there's got to be someone better qualified than you to do. You're positive that, somebody's got a skill set that's better suited for whatever the task is. And the reality is you're not going to get to be a leader at any level and in any position if you don't push yourself in ways that you didn't think that you could or you didn't really want to or you weren't wildly enthusiastic about. And so then I thought, okay, why do we do this? Why, I bet you, if I were to go around and I were to ask, especially the women in the audience, how many times have you said, thanks, but? You've written it, you've said it, you've thought it. I bet we all have a lot of experiences of saying, thanks, but I'm the wrong one, it's not the right time, circumstances are not perfect, the stars are not totally aligned, whatever it happens to be. And I think that's a mistake. I think that's a real mistake for women. I think we have to say, yes, thanks, just thanks, and do whatever it is. And at the end of the day, we're not going to be awesome every time you do it the first time. And I was thinking about, my children constantly come home, and they've done like their first ever ceramics piece. I mean, now this has been a while, my children are old, but first ever ceramics piece, they come home with a bowl, and they it's not that great. It's just not that great. And you say to them, why would you think it'd be that great? I mean, of course you say, that's fantastic, I'm delighted, you're awesome, you're the next Picasso, but ultimately, why do you think that you're the first time that you've ever touched clay that you're going to be great as a maker of bowls and cups and ashtrays and whatever else your children made for you? You don't expect that. You have to, that's experience, that's practice, that's doing it over and over again. But somehow women, especially as we get closer to leadership positions, we think that we have to be perfect. And we have to be perfect the first time we make something. And I don't know why that is. We could have a whole long discussion about culture and I don't know what else. Who knows where that comes from. But I think it's important for us all to remember that when you push yourself out of your comfort zone and you pick up the clay or you do the speech or you do whatever the thing is you're being asked to do for the first time ever, maybe it's not so great. But that doesn't mean that you stop there. You don't just go, I was asked to move out of my comfort zone. I did so. It didn't go as well as I thought. You lose sleep at night. You say, I'm never doing that again. That's a mistake. That's a mistake. And that holds, I think, women back a lot of the time. Not only do you say thanks, but even when you say thanks, then you start second-guessing yourself and questioning whether or not you were as successful as you thought you were going to be when you did this. And I think we should all be a little more caring of ourselves, I guess is the right word, which is to say, it's okay if I do this thing the first time and I'm not awesome at it. I just have to be good enough at it to be able to do it again. And then you just keep working at it. And I would also guess, although again, I don't know, I would guess that if we asked men, most men, first of all, wouldn't question when asked. They would say, of course, delighted, what time? And then they're not going to reflect on it. They're not going to perseverate, stew, talk to everyone they know about how it went. They're just going to do it, and they're going to move on and do something else. And there's none of that sort of self-reflection. And I do think that self-reflection holds women back. So I want to say to you that when you have an opportunity to push yourself out of your comfort zone, in whatever way that is, it can be large, it can be small, don't put yes, thanks, but. Go for the thanks. Yes, I would love to do that. I would love to give this an opportunity. I appreciate you asking me, and then see how it goes. You can get feedback if you want, and you can try to improve on the next time, but don't simply give up after one try of making the not most the world's least interesting bowl, move on and do it again, because otherwise you're never going to get the leadership skills that you need. So you have to have some confidence, to follow the ambassador's remarks. You have to have some confidence in yourself. Yeah, I can do this. I may not have done that role. I may not have done that position. I may not have done that particular thing, but I have skills, I have experiences. They're going to be valuable. I can leverage them. I have a network of people that I can ask. They could give me advice. They could give me support. And having said yes or thanks instead of thanks but, then it's important again to remember to do that to others and ask other people, and particularly other women, to step outside of their comfort zone as well, and to support and encourage them when they do so, especially if that first effort at stepping it up doesn't go as perfectly as everyone had hoped. Doesn't mean it's the wrong person, doesn't mean it's the wrong task. It just means that maybe you need a little more time and you need a little more support. And with that kind of encouragement behind you, then you can constantly sort of pick up and say, yes, thanks, I'll do this. And I'll ask others behind me to do the same thing. And that's, I think, the only way that we're going to get past the sort of grim and dismal statistics that we have for women in leadership. So it's not just about being asked to do things, it's saying yes when asked. So we can't keep shooting ourselves in the foot. And if I could just make one more sort of point on this, panels is a great example. I don't want to say how many panels I've been on where it's me and a bunch of men, me and a bunch of men, me and a bunch of men, but it's a lot. And you can't say no to that, but you have to remember when that's your job to say, I'm not going to repeat that mistake. I'm going to ask for women, and when I do, I don't want to hear thanks but. I want to hear thanks. That's a great opportunity. And yeah, maybe it's not my perfect area, but I'm going to have to go. Because if everyone who gets an invitation says thanks but, then guess what? We default back to me and a bunch of men, or however it is in your situation of leadership. And so I think it is incumbent on all of us, the men and the women, to make sure that we are asking a diverse group of people to participate in leadership posts. Doesn't just mean by gender, it's also by age, it's by ethnicity, race, background. There's a lot of ways that we can talk about diversity. That you encourage people that you don't automatically think of because maybe they don't fulfill all of the criteria that you're looking for, but they have enough. And then when they say thanks, you encourage them and support them in that effort. And when they succeed at that, you allow them the time and the space to invite others to come behind them who are equally as diverse. And I think it's only when all of us in the room start to say thanks instead of thanks but that we start to switch some of these slightly grim statistics about women's participation in jobs, in leadership, in community roles, fill in the blank where you want them to be. And so I want to thank all of you for this opportunity, and I particularly want to thank Chris, and I'm really happy that at the end of the day, I stopped writing thanks but and just backed up, thanks. Happy to be there. And then sort of see how it goes. So I really appreciate it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dr. Elms. Now we will proceed to the first panel, which will discuss the topic, Tackling the Gender Gap, Merit or Token. The discussion will look at how women can break the glass ceiling, the progress that women has made so far in terms of assuming leadership positions in the workplace, and the importance of female mentorship, as well as the role that male leaders can play in empowering women. For panel one, please join me in welcoming virtually our panelists, YB Yanti Rahman, co-chair ASEAN Business Advisory Council, Ms. Sharon Toh, head of ASEAN Region SWIFT, Deborah Comini, Regional Director, UNICEF East Asia and Pacific, and last but not least, joining us on stage, Amalina Abdul Nasir, Product Policy Manager, Trust and Safety, TikTok. Before we begin, I would like to invite today's moderator, Executive Director at the EU-ASEAN Business Council, Mr. Chris Humphrey, on stage. Mr. Humphrey, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this our first panel of the day. We'll be talking about tackling the gender gap, and is it merit or token? It's a stark reality. We actually have to ask this question, I think. The World Economic Forum said it will take another 135 years before the gender gap worldwide is closed, and for women and men to finally achieve equal status. As of 2020, women still accounted for only a quarter of seats in national parliaments worldwide, and only 7% of leadership positions in Fortune 500 companies. If you look around this region, we only have one female head of state at the moment. COVID-19 has in fact widened the gap. The hardest hit sectors for lockdowns and the rapid digitalization are those where women were more frequently employed, and combined with the additional pressures of providing care at home, which is why it is now more important than ever for society to press on in its efforts to dismantle the culture and environment that are excluding women from opportunities to advance. Things like pay gaps, motherhood penalties, and microaggressions, all of which compel women to perform at a higher standard than men to achieve the same level of success. I hope that this is areas that this panel this afternoon can uncover and talk about and try and find ways that we can advance women in the workplace and indeed in leadership positions everywhere. We do have 3 of my panelists are online, so thank you for joining us. And in particular, thank you to Sharon, who I know has not been feeling very well this week, so I'm glad she could make this today. I'll start actually with a good friend of mine, the Honourable Yanti Raman. Yanti, thank you for being with us again today. I know you've been doing another one of these events this morning as well. Until recently, Yanti, you were chairing the ASEAN Business Advisory Council, and you're now the co-chair, having passed the baton over to Cambodia. Looking around the region in ASEAN, how do you think we can actually get to a position where we can have more women in leadership roles like you've been in?
Hi, Chris. I wish I can see you. Somehow my screen, I can't see anybody. So I hope all of you can actually hear me or see me. You can, right, Chris?
Yeah, we can, yes. Yep.
Oh, okay, that's good. So just to also let everybody know, probably just a quick one, just to wish everybody Happy International Women's Day, where we celebrate women. And it's also nice that it's not just about celebrating women, International Women's Day is also for the men, to remind them of the things that the women actually achieve at the same time. It's really funny that you actually mentioned this, because I've just finished my parliament session last week, and it's been a very long 1 month for us, especially in the parliament session. And when you actually touch with regards to women in Asia, with regards to parliamentarians, you can actually see a very slow in terms of rise for women parliamentarians. I think for the past, from 1995 to 2022, in Asia alone, you will only see an increase of women parliamentarians of 7.5%. So you will actually see the highest is US, Europe comes in second. And of course, the lowest is in Asia. But we are progressing. It's not like we're not progressing. I think we've actually seen a lot of the CEOs now in the ASEAN region as well. Leaders are coming up. Future leaders in the Philippines, running for presidencies are now female. And it's good to actually see that movement. Even though in Brunei, one term before that, 5 years ago, we only have about 9% of the female parliamentarians, and 2017, there's an increase to 15%. So that's something hopeful and positive that we actually see. So my wishes in the future is to actually, for Brunei alone, is to actually have the first female prime minister, female ministers. We've never had that before. So the highest in Brunei is really deputy minister itself. So I think one that we actually see is when we talk about that, and I like where Deborah actually mentioned before with regards to thanks, but, last year, when Brunei chaired ASEAN, being the only female country chair in all the 10 ASEAN countries, and also among the youngest to chair that was actually a huge pressure. You can't actually imagine that, but you've got the whole idea about your councils, your brotherhoods and your sisterhood being there in the council itself, the strength is really with everyone. And I can't believe how much we actually achieved last year during our chairmanship. And we broke all records of having all the high officials' interventions and meetings that we can't even imagine we are able to achieve. And couple of years ago, I became the first female president for our institution in Brunei for the professional of surveyors, engineers, and architects after 35 years. And breaking that ceiling glass is really, it's being the first for a lot of the things is actually quite something that we are proud of. And I guess being a role model to the younger generation is really important. And we need that. We need more of this role model out there, especially from the female leaders, to actually show them. And this is where, thanks, there is no but to the end. So I'm glad that actually Deborah actually mentioned with regards to this. And there's a lot of things that we can actually do. I mean, one thing about being a woman is really, you know, we have empathy. We're very passionate in a lot of things. You know, I'm a mother of 5. I just had my grandson last year as well. I mean, I know people won't believe, like, oh my God, like you're now a grandmother. But I am celebrating this. It's not just because like of age factor or anything, but I think as a woman, you will feel proud in every single thing that you can actually achieve. So I do hope that, you know, I like the younger generations to really put that in mind. And there is one quote I remember where Emma Watson actually touched this, and she was actually saying, "If not me, who? And if not now, when?" So it's really very encouraging, and I do hope there's more of our younger generations that would actually look up to the role model, especially with us. And there's a lot of opportunities. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much. I must say, I don't know how you juggle all your roles and keep on going. Sharon, I'll come to you next. You're someone in a regional leadership role at SWIFT. How important do you actually think diversity and inclusion is in the workplace? And are you seeing diversity and inclusion for women growing in the financial services sector?
Yes, thanks, Chris, and hi, everyone. I wish I could be there with you in person. Well, I think when it comes to diversity and inclusion, I think it's hugely important in the workplace. You know, simple economics for me, I always say, how can a country achieve its full potential if it decides to ignore half the population, right? And it's the same in the workplace. So how can a company grow and achieve its full potential if we choose to, you know, exclude half of our employees? So I think for businesses today, especially in this digital era, and we're seeing that in ASEAN, I mean, ASEAN is in the forefront of innovation, right? You know, in order to stay competitive, innovation is on everybody's agenda. I think it's everybody's job right now. So being innovative now isn't a nice to have. I think it's fundamentally imperative. So, you know, the diverse perspective or, you know, ideas, new ideas, creativity and risk-taking, I think these are the superpowers, I would say, that the companies and every companies are trying to build now. And SWIFT, we are I always say that we are an innovator in our industry. We are supporting over 11,000 communities, right, in over 200 countries. This is especially key and important for us because everything we do is actually for the financial services industry. So in order for us to do that effectively, we essentially need to have a diverse team with different backgrounds, skills, experience, and knowledge in order for us to be successful. And if you look at diversity now, to me, it is a fact, right? Because we do all have a very diverse team, but simply putting everybody together doesn't actually tap on their creative potential. I think inclusion actually does that. So we need to release that talent, that potential by being inclusive, because this will then lead to divergent thinking, eventually lead to innovation, which then leads to competitive advantage. So I think the organization must play a role and must build a culture where people feel psychologically safe, for us to be confident enough to put an idea on the table, right? And knowing that even if it doesn't work, it's not because of them. I think we need to create that trust that is needed for people to share their best thinking, even their worst idea or their best idea on the table, and encourage them to share, to discuss and challenge. So this is something that we are doing quite a lot. And even with my team, I have actually looked at, we have actually rolled out what we call part of the rules of improvisation, which is yes and. So we are trying to encourage people to share ideas, but not shut down ideas. Yes and allowed us to build ideas on top of ideas, and you're going to create lots of ideas, and that's what divergent thinking is all about. So it's really exciting time for us, but it is a big focus, at least within SWIFT, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and a lot of activities. We're building a lot of activities and initiatives around promoting that.
Thanks, Sharon. I'll go to Deborah next, who's joining us. I think you're in Bangkok at the moment, Deborah, is that right?
Good afternoon, Chris, and ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I'm in Bangkok.
Thanks. Your work you're doing at UNICEF, of course, is focusing a lot on children and particularly on girls as well. How would you say that organisations such as yourself can actually help girls and women get empowered from a very early stage in their lives? And what role do you think the private sector can play in working more with you in that area?
Thank you, Chris. I would like to start by identifying what barriers girls face, because we cannot tackle problems unless we understand them. And the issue is barriers start very, very early on. When we look at ASEAN countries, the evidence tells us that we have higher attendance and completion rates in high school by girls than boys. So all good, right? You would expect them to then continue on that path. No, it doesn't happen. Because after that, they are less likely to be formally employed. We talk about the NEET group, those who are not in education, not in employment, not in training. The vast majority are girls, not only in ASEAN. This is a feature of all countries in the world. But now we have to understand why this happens and what is preventing all these well-educated young women from moving into employment, let alone grow into leadership roles. There is a study that UNICEF commissioned just a couple of years ago to understand what's happening, what's behind this almost roadblock that girls experience. We already knew that as early as age 5, gender socialization starts having an impact on both girls and boys, hence later on men and women. We knew already that in the region we have very high rates of early pregnancy and early marriage. And this clearly limits opportunities for young women, but also their capacity to envision possible opportunities. And then with our research, we got some more detailed picture. We found that women experience, young women, much lower self-confidence, much higher fear of failure than young men. This was not a total surprise, but it came across quite starkly. And also, we found out that women feel that their career possibilities are limited by the pressure of what society considers appropriate roles for women. So this is feeding into itself. There is pressure, you take on the pressure as your own, and you limit your possibilities. But then there is another barrier that's very significant for women to start or grow a business. And that's insufficient access to affordable finance, Sharon, business networks and information. This is one element I was surprised by. And then there are also from early childhood certain traits that girls are encouraged to exhibit, to be more submissive, to be more obedient, to be cheerful. There are gender norms that shape aspirations, but also shape the choices that are made for girls in accessing their education and later on their career. And then by the time they become adults, we have all these layers of barriers that keep building on top of each other. And this limits young women's agency. It limits their participation, economic participation, also political participation. Now, on what UNICEF can do together with others. Again, first we need to recognize the problem. By recognizing, understanding the problem, we then move on to solutions. We cannot do this without involving girls and young women because we need to get their perspective and we need to involve them in creating solutions together. But we also need to be clear, this is not a simple journey. We need to understand all the complexities in the life journey of a young woman, how parents, teachers, schools, social media, hobbies, advertising, they're all interconnected in the way they shape the choices a young girl, a young woman makes, or is able to make, or is allowed to make in the professional life. Efforts to help young women catch up later on are not enough. We need to start very, very, very early when the girl starts accessing the first cycle of education. This means we need to recreate an environment that is able to challenge those gender norms that limit women's lives. This means really generating systemic changes. These are not small changes, and they have to uproot centuries of traditions. And this means that we need public sector to work together with private sector, all in the same direction. Secondly, we need young women have support and access to building those skills that are needed to make the transition into employment, into leadership. And this includes exploring and excelling in STEM careers, in all those careers that are not traditional for them, and also paying attention to financial empowerment. And that also comes from giving them financial literacy from a very early age, because this is frequently neglected in girls' education. And for businesses in particular, for companies, I would advise them to do a complete review of their own corporate strategies, identify the obstacles that are in place that prevent gender equality in their workplace, in the marketplace they can influence. We should look at gender stereotyping in the media, in advertising, because also these can be very harmful because they shape perceptions, they shape actions at a very early age. And finally, events like today's, we are sharing stories, we are inspiring each other, we are providing support. I think these are critical, and I would love to see more of these events, more of these stories shared with young women across the region. You know, it's the power of seeing and being seen. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Amelina, thank you for being here with me, so I'm not too lonely on stage. Picking up on a few points actually there from Deborah, the tech sector is pretty much male-dominated, although I think here in Southeast Asia the stats are better than elsewhere in the region. What do you think some of the reservations are for women to get into the tech sector? And then a second question, perhaps if you don't mind picking up on what Deborah was talking about, is there a role for social media platforms like TikTok in trying to break down some of those social stereotypes?
Yeah, definitely. I think perhaps one of the merits of being the final one within the panel is me echoing a lot of the points brought up by fellow panelists. I think to your question, Chris, I think first and foremost is something that's been mentioned. I think generally women are still still don't prefer or refrain from pursuing STEM-related careers. And I think that's compounded with B, and that is the sort of the masculinity, the idea of masculinity surrounding the tech industry and tech roles within the industry. And I think most of them have the mindset or the perception that roles within tech are only limited to, say, programming or perhaps engineering. But I think that is definitely corresponding to the third point, and that is the lack of exposure and aspirational figures within the sector. And that would be some of the reasons that I have in mind. The interplay, definitely one does not stand alone from the other, and that's something that we're seeing up till today. I think these kind of movements, such as gender mainstreaming policies, and policies can only take us so far. You know, it really is for us to have that bare minimum. But echoing the various remarks is that it gives us that particular vision or where we want to move towards achieving equality in the sector. I would say that beyond policies, perhaps where women are placed, perhaps how women are being assessed and how women are embraced are key here, because beyond these policies, it's really the mindset. You know, we can have these policies and have representation, but the mindset of how women in leadership roles or key positions are being treated are also very important, I think, to highlight here. I think a lot of us here can also quote perhaps a story or two, or how, you know, we're the only women in that particular meeting room, or how we need to put in extra effort to be taken seriously. So I think beyond sort of the movement of diversity, inclusion, and policies lies really on the mindset here. With regards to perhaps, you know, companies like TikTok, Facebook, and the likes, I would say that perhaps within the tech industry itself, it is definitely known for its diversity and inclusion initiatives. It's really huge in that. And I think that echoes in the fact that the support thus far is there. It definitely is warming up to embrace more women in various tech positions. More so if it translates to leadership position, it's something that we are slowly seeing trickling in. But definitely it's an industry that's very promising in terms of embracing and putting up equality. So I think vis-a-vis changing mindsets of the particular industry, of community or society, I think with regards to the tech industry itself, perhaps unique to other industries, it's also how perhaps women who are interested to be within the industries to also change their mindset in how actually there's a wealth of opportunities for them within the tech space. So I think that would be it.
Thank you. A question actually I want to ask to all the panel, and by the way, people online, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I'll pick them up from there. But for all my panel, talking about stereotypes, societal directions, you know, societies tend to be very male-dominated. The woman is the one who's meant to look after the children. It's a very old-fashioned mindset. But how can we start to break that down? And my question really is, where should the leadership come in that? Should it come from governments? Should it come from the education system? Or should it come from the private sector? Perhaps, Yanti, you want to try and take this one on first.
Okay, so I assume you give it to me because I have the most children, I guess. So just to actually see it this way, I'm an architect. I'm professionally in the construction industry, and in Brunei, only 2.3% of our workforce female in the construction industry. And if I actually give you a list of architects that is basically registered in Brunei, only 5% of registered architects are female. So you can actually see how male-dominant construction industry is in general. So I don't think, I think like even with our background in terms of religion or spiritually, we are actually taught with regards to responsibility and you know, making sure like children is our priority, you know, those kind of things. But it's always about that balance, Chris. You know, where do you find that balance? Because you know that for female, our career clock with our biological clock will never actually match. It's always mismatched all the time. But also the strength of women is they're so good in multitasking. I'm not complaining. I tell my kids I probably am not the best mom in the world. But, you know, I have actually given them every single thing the time that I can actually give them, and not even ignoring them. I remember, like, if I actually had to travel abroad, and my youngest is currently 10 years old, and he's got like spelling test or something like that, I actually had to do it virtually with him just to make sure that he does his homework, he does his own things, you know. So because I think as a role as a mother, and to make sure that your mom is still around, you know, I still do that sort of mummy kind of responsibility. And that's the beauty about women, you know, because we do have that emotion, making sure that our children are being taken care of. I think it's just a matter of, you know, male will also need to understand that. You know, like we are also trying to, so if you can actually have both sides to actually do their responsibilities and respect what women actually is doing at the same time, and I think you can actually achieve more. I never complain with regards to what is given to me and the responsibility of that. I always see it as a challenge to actually tell, you know, my children or the youth, the younger generation, to say, like, we can do this. Again, the aspect of role model is really important. Like I said, in Brunei, female, the percent of female in the construction arena is way, way too low. I don't actually have anybody I would actually look up to in the female, in the construction industry during my time to say, I want to be like her. So now I can actually go to all schools and tell them, this is what you can actually do.
Sharon, your viewpoint.
Sure. Well, I would say such expectation and conditioning, I would call it conditioning, actually starts before a child is born, right? I'm just going to share a personal story, right? On this kind of, why this type of expectation. I came from a traditional Chinese family. 29th of December, 1973 is the day that I was born. Sorry, that goes, I mean, my age is out in the open right now. It was the day that I was born, and this day is also the day my grandfather passed away. Okay, I'm the first child of my parents, and there was this hope of my granddad that to have a baby boy, but I emerged instead. So my granddad was informed the news and passed away a couple of hours after I was born. So growing up, I was being told the reason my granddad passed away sooner rather than later was because he was disappointed that I'm a girl and not a boy. So can you imagine the impact it had on a kid growing up? So if I am allowed to say this, right, that really sucks, right? Growing up thinking that I'm not good enough because I'm not a boy. Then when I was 11 years old, I was told by my grandmother that I have to start learning how to cook, do housework, because if I don't, I'm not considered a woman. And there you go, my journey, learning domestic housework and cooking started then. And as the eldest sister, I have to do everything for my brothers, right? So that was the kind of environment I grew up in. And why am I sharing this? Because I think this is not only happening to me, but I believe it happens to millions of girls out there, right? In different countries and across culture. And there are such expectations that, you know, that's the kind of role women needs to assume. So being born in this reality set me on a lifetime mission to prove that I'm actually enough and more than just doing housework and cook, and I can be as capable as a man. So I think that the societal role of women, I believe it has progressed, right? It has changed over the years, and so are men, because I've seen that in my family. My brothers who had never lifted their fingers at home doing chores, looking after kids, mentoring their schoolwork, they are doing it right now while working. And my neighbor is a great example. He's actually a house husband, and his wife is working. So although we have seen these changes, I think expectations of women, such expectation of women still exist. And obviously there are ways that we could go about doing it, whether it is organization or it's a society or the government. I think it's a collective effort. I think starting from home, right? I mean, we can even start from home. I mean, raise our children to play a full role at home from the very start as an individual, not through the lens of the gender, like, you know, not segregating what a boy should be doing or what a girl should be doing. And I think they need to see role models doing this, like so as an adult like us or even the parents. I think we will have to assume that responsibility of walking the talk. And I think this is how we want to influence at least the next generation to see individuals as individual, but not through the lens of gender.
Thanks very much. Deborah, picking up on things that Sharon was talking about there, about, you know, the mindsets of people. A lot of it will probably come down to when children start going to school. Are there any sort of recommendations that UNICEF would suggest to educational authorities in the region about the way we're educating our children to try and break down these gender stereotypes?
It has to start very early. It has to start very early, and it has to start not as a vertically imposed initiative. It needs to be culturally appropriate. So if we come with a cookie cutter approach to this is how you get to gender equality in society through the school system, and you apply the same model country after country, it's going to fail. So it has to start by understanding how people function. It has to respect the culture, has to respect where people come from. So that's a number one recommendation. Has to be culturally sensitive and appropriate. Again, it's not vertical. It has to start with teachers being the first ambassadors, because we cannot expect a teacher that grew up in a certain system to be able to transmit a different message to the new students. So there must be a very strong emphasis on teachers' training. Sometimes it sounds a bit like the kind of standard language by ministries of education, but it really means forming a generation of teachers that embody, that project a certain image. And I think it's also important for the education system to do what I was talking about, stereotyping in advertisement, stereotyping in social media. There is so much stereotyping still in the textbooks. There is so much stereotyping in the way classrooms are organized. There is so much stereotyping that's just unconsciously transmitted in the classroom. And that requires a very careful self-analysis. Where do these stereotypes come from and how we address, because they tend to be quite unconscious. And I think we also need to break the stigma of acknowledging that we grow up with some of these stereotypes, some of these bias. And it takes a certain work of deconstruction. And I can say that myself. I'm not from ASEAN, but I'm from a rather traditional, conservative, Northern Italian group of people. Yeah? And there are certain elements of my self-awareness. It took time to acknowledge. It took time to realize I had to make an effort to break them down. And yeah, I think that it's important we all take it also with a certain degree of self-criticism and humility if we want to transmit it in a different way that will be easier for the next generation, also through the school system.
Thanks.
Shall I build on that one? For me, I definitely empathize with stories like what Sharon just mentioned. For myself, I came from a rather, I'd say, unique background. So growing up, I was from a really religious school here in Singapore. I spent 12 years until my A-levels. And coming from a religious school, an Islamic religious school, it's sort of set in stone that at the end of the day, you're going to be a religious teacher. So when I crossed over into security, international security, doing counterterrorism, and now doing policy work, it's really something that almost, I guess, nobody could fathom. You know, how would you even get there in terms of the level of resources, in terms of the level of how the notion of women, the role of women and responsibility are being perhaps portrayed within the education system. And I definitely echoed the fact that while efforts from government, corporations come in tandem together, I think there's definitely a lot of influence from the support system. The immediate ones, definitely how we are bringing up our future generation. I mean, I'm still young. I'm not even married, so I don't have kids or grandkids. But it is really important in how we portray and how we communicate female leadership, female roles within society today. And I think for that, for me, and that's something that I'm very passionate about, and it's something that I can resonate very much within the tech industry, because for us, we do a lot of campus recruitment as well. We do a lot of outreach to university undergraduates, bachelors, masters, so that they are becoming more aware of how these sort of opportunities are within tech that are equal for boys, girls, and across different disciplines. It's not just limited to perhaps those doing programming or engineering, but to know that, especially for the younger girls, that we need women in investigations, we need women in policy making, we need women in business development. So I think definitely while we have those on focusing on the rather macro level in terms of corporation and government, definitely early intervention, like what the rest have mentioned in terms of education, in terms of immediate family circle, will definitely come a long way in terms of how we really want to portray equality to our future generation.
I've got a very direct question to ask the four of you. In some parts of the world, in some jurisdictions, there's actually positive discrimination legislation in place. It forces companies to have a certain number of women on their boards or in senior management positions. Do you think that's a good thing? And if so, is it something that governments in this part of the world should follow? Any one of you can go first on this one. Yanti is unmuted, so perhaps Yanti can go first.
Right, Chris. I wouldn't actually say it's wrong, and there is no wrong and right with regards to this, because if I look at it in the context of ASEAN, really, culture is very strong at the same time. To break that mentality of a very traditionalist, it also takes time. I mean, I'm just giving an example with Brunei, because the fact that we have a lot of graduates, female graduates, I mean, the number of female graduates versus male graduates are more or less the same. So the thing about it is, if we actually look at like how many of the female tend to work more towards the public sector versus private sector, majority of them will probably go towards the public sector. Well, I guess it's security. It's a lot of things that they're actually looking at. That's actually quite fine. But it's really breaking that, you know, there's always the thanks but for female. Normally, I think it's because they don't really see what is ahead of them. I think, again, like I said, with the role model things, I think there's a lot of push that can actually be done. I mean, if we actually look at nowadays, prime ministers, yeah, they're all getting young, female especially in Finland. The youngest prime minister is like 34 when she actually became the prime minister. And we have New Zealand prime minister at 41. And again, environmentalist activists like Greta, she started at 15, you know. So there's this really role model out there that people actually need to see. And it is needs the change needs to be done. I mean, policymakers, business leaders, everyone needs to step in. It's not just a matter of policymakers, because there's a lot of policies out there, too many. I mean, they're all good, but I think in a way that doesn't work. So we cannot actually have one policy for all the ASEAN region or all countries because it varies. And to actually look into gender equality into reality, I think it is moving in ASEAN. It is moving in a very positive direction. It's just a matter of time. Thanks, Chris.
Sharon, positive discrimination, good, bad?
I don't think it's bad, right? I mean, I think it's great to see conscious effort to try to narrow that gap and organization making this as a KPIs and as an objectives to ensure that they're going to increase 50% of women leadership within the organization. This is something that we are doing within the organization as well. However, I think there is one point that it's something that I truly believe is, while doing so, let's also not forget about gender equity, right? Because we also need to look at how we can treat both men and women fairly based on their needs, and this also means that treatment can be different, but we have to be fair. And I think we want to be mindful that it's an important, gender equity is actually an important role in achieving gender equality, because the inequalities that exist means that we have to give more to ensure that all gender have equal opportunities. So for example, in financial services, women are still underrepresented, right? Which therefore suggests that women may need more support and encouragement to enter this workforce, and more actions may need to be taken to make it accessible for women as it is to men. So the thing is, in other words, give different treatment for equal opportunity. I think if this does not happen, we will continue to widen the gap. So I think it's a good thing to see some of this conscious effort, but we also have to be mindful of this gender equity because it could have a very different, it could have a similar impact as well, which is widening the gap.
Deborah, do you agree with that assessment?
I'm very much in favor of very intentional, mindful, affirmative action. It will take too long otherwise. We need to create that critical mass of women to also become the role model for the younger generation. Without that critical mass, again, it will take so long to close the gap. We need more professional women, women in politics, women in leadership, also to be there supporting each other, creating networks. And for that, you need a critical mass. If I look at my own organization, I joined more than 30 years ago. Yeah. So when I joined, the vast majority of colleagues in leadership positions were men. And it took me a while, first to realize I was not right, and then to identify myself with a future generation of leaders. And that only happened when I identified a role model that was female, that was a bit like me, was a Japanese lady, small size, a bit of an introvert, had the kind of structured way of expressing herself that was mine, and it was not this very extrovert male Anglo at the time model. So I said, ooh, if she can do it, I can do it. But I had to see her, and then I had to see others. But then there was a very, very conscious decision the organization took to take some of us on a female leadership training, and that started networking among us, and that created the kind of mutual support that made a difference. And that came together with deliberate affirmative action in appointments, in senior level positions, until we reached parity, to the extent that now we just need to watch the numbers, but that affirmative action on gender at the most senior levels is not so critical anymore, but we need to continue watching it. So I think it was I would not be here without that very conscious decision taken by my organization. I'm privileged because I know it's a very progressive environment from a gender perspective, and I wish all industries have the same kind of approach, and I wish all young girls to then be able to get on this kind of journey, not only the ones who work for my organization, not only the ones who work for the United Nations.
Annalena,
Okay. For myself, I think positive discrimination. It's really a mixed bag for me. And I'd say that borrowing an example I did when I was working with counterterrorism, it's really dependent on the political socio-economic landscape of those particular countries. So I shall quote, say, for example, Indonesia. They have been having gender mainstreaming policies since the 1990s. And it is there on paper. But until today, we see women's involvement, women's representation within the Counterterrorism Bureau and such, but they don't hold key positions. They are merely representations. So I think that's why the very first part that I mentioned, that it's not just representation per se, but it's really where you place them, how they are assessed, and how they are embraced and valued in those kind of management positions is really important, because at the end of the day, it's if having women as a pure representation that it really defeats the entire purpose of gender equality and gender equity. So I think it's really sort of a mixed bag for me, but definitely I think there are definitely merits to really push and make sure that we strive towards that particular vision that we are moving towards. So I think it's really a hit and miss. It really depends on the particular corporation, the particular country, but definitely for some countries, it's sort of like a step towards a positive direction. Perhaps it may take more time for the Southeast Asia region, especially, because at least within the counterterrorism landscape, only in 2020 we had our very first female counterterrorism chief. That is in 2020, and that was really largely celebrated as well. So I think to see more women in leadership, perhaps we could use positive discrimination. But if we can achieve a state where women are valued and we can do away with these kind of policies, is definitely the state that we want to be in.
Brilliant. Last round of questions to each of you, because we're running out of time, and a very easy one, I think, for you all. What are your top 3 dreams to help achieve greater gender equality and women empowerment in the workplace? Your top 3 dreams to achieve greater gender equality and women empowerment in the workplace.
Can I be the last, Chris?
Yes, you can go last, Yanti. Annalena, you're here next to me.
That's a huge one. I would like to pass the baton to Sharon first, though.
Can I be the third last? Let me think.
Do you think you need men to do a lot more to help women?
Yeah, I think male allies are important, right? I think they could be part of the solution, right, to the problem that we're having, to help and support women. So this is something that we are doing quite a bit as well within our organization. So we're going to see more and more of men showing allyship, right? And the other piece for me, really, the dream will be, I guess, the dream to see more women, having the opportunity, and more women taking that first step and taking that risk. Because I think we tend to shy away from a lot of our achievement, and focus on the things that we don't have. And I think earlier on, some of you has alluded to that. So just kind of be brave and get out of your comfort zone and step up to the plate, and just claim your seat at the table. So that's For me?
Okay,
Okay,
I'm
is that
ready
how-
to take the beacon now. I think building on to what Shara mentioned about allyship, and it's something that I think we can definitely see more of, is women empowering each other. If we have network of women coming together, even within our own industries, empowering each other, sharing of resources, sharing of experiences, that would be of tremendous help in terms of making more purposeful, more informed career decision. And, you know, we can definitely bring each other up together. And I think the second one, and I think most of us are definitely hope, and this, I think collectively our dream is to see more women as role models, women in key leadership positions. That's something I think for myself, perhaps representing the younger generation is definitely something that I hope to see. And definitely thirdly would be that corresponding to that, seeing more women, the percentage of women perhaps in our respective industries. I think all of us are representing industries where women are severely underrepresented, unfortunately. So really hope, you know, perhaps in a few years when we meet again, we can see really promising changes and that we are really moving towards the vision, our respective vision that we have shared here. So I think that will be the top 3 dreams that I have.
Thank you. Sorry, Deborah, coming to you next. I promise Yanti can go last.
Deborah the dreamer. Dream that all young girls have the confidence to pursue their dreams. We need to work on confidence and have the means to develop the skills to reach those dreams. But the means, education. And then no young girl to feel the pressure to conform if there are social norms that would crush those dreams. Again, have the confidence to go against the stream if you really believe in what you can achieve as a woman. And I would also like to see all young boys see as clearly as young girls the importance of equality, because they benefit from equality as well if they understand how much they also get undermined, stifled, limited in the expression of their emotions, limited in the range of professions they could also excel to, limited in caring also within the family. And UNICEF is very much committed to pushing forward this agenda, and we also believe that having strong female role models is so important, and we are looking for role models to be with us in ASEAN. If you're interested in being part of this journey, also with UNICEF, please contact us. I think we can do great work together. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Okay, Yanti, last word to you, but as you chose to go last, you get an extra question from me, which is, do we need to have more organizations like the ASEAN Women's Entrepreneur Network helping with mentorship for women?
Yes, we do. And the thing about it is we do have so many of this network on the ground. I think it's just a matter, it's quite vast and it's everywhere. We really need to work together. And this is where we need to, unite. We do things together, because it's so many. Sometimes less is more at the same time, so we have a lot of platform in ASEAN, especially for women. I mean, this morning I attended the Go Nego show with regards to Women Entrepreneurship Summit. I mean, they're always emphasized with regards to women, and they do mentorship. It's not just about the platform of that. I think I'm a strong believer in mentorship, Chris. I've always been a mentor ever since I actually set up my own firm. And we're now reaching out to others. We need more female mentors as well, the professional ones. We want them to, especially, holding the hands of those girls underprivileged, give them the confidence to break from what they used to be. If they can just break that cycle, that's all we're actually asking for, is to go outside the comfort zone. And we need more leaders, especially in ASEAN, female leaders in the political arena at the same time. We have so many leaders in terms of CEOs, on others, but I think if you actually look at in the political arena, we don't really have much in the ASEAN region. And I hope that one day we will be able to see more of this, because the voice coming in, it's not just as parliamentarians, as I mentioned just now. In Asia alone, that's the lowest of female parliamentarians, compared to any other part of the world. And we need more voices from the female. I mean, like I said, policy is one thing, but we need to make sure the policy actually works for all as well. So I hope that actually answers your question, Chris.
It does indeed. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we've run out of time for this panel. Please join me in thanking my panel. I think 4 inspiring ladies, 4 inspiring leaders. I must say, Yanti is someone I've always looked up to in the region, and it's been a pleasure working with her over the years. So thank you very much.
Thank you to our panelists and to our participants for a fruitful discussion in panel 1. The next item will be the keynote speech, which is a pre-recorded video by Tan Sri Datuk Rebecca Fatima Maria, Executive Director of the Aipac Secretariat.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the EU-ASEAN Business Council, the delegates and the audience of the Women Leaders Summit. Thank you very much for this kind invitation to speak to you as we celebrate International Women's Day this year. I am Rebecca Santamaria, the Executive Director of the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, or Aipac Secretariat, since 2019, and an Aipac delegate for Malaysia years before that. Aipac is a place where leaders from all over the Asia Pacific come together to discuss policy, share best practices that will make for a better tomorrow for all of us in the region. Like many decades-old institutions, Aipac, while not meaning to be, was to a large extent a boys' club. The host of meetings that we have had annually used to be attended by primarily male delegates. 30 years on, I'm happy to report that much has changed. One of the notable achievements of this forum is its contribution to the increasingly more frequent policy discussions about women's economic empowerment, which have, over the years, driven home the fact that it is the right thing to do, the smart thing to do, because inclusive economies will benefit everyone. It provides policymakers with best practices as well as tools to translate policy into action. One such tool, the Aipac Women and Economy Dashboard, prepared by the Aipac Policy Support Unit every 2 years, monitors the status of women's economic integration in the region by tracking developments in 5 key areas: access to capital and assets, access to markets, skills, capacity building and health, leadership, voice and agency, innovation and technology. It tells us where we're succeeding, such as in market access, and where we could do better, such as in leadership, voice and agency, where it is obvious that we still have a long way to go. This is especially so in ensuring that women have equal voice and voting power as men in the political arena. The dashboard tells us, for example, that the average percentage of seats held by women in parliaments and ministerial positions in the Aipac region in 2020 was only 23.9% and 19.1% respectively. These figures reflect a wide disparity as well as a barrier to achieving gender equality in policy decisions affecting access to economic opportunities as well as protection from violence and social prejudices. Representation equals voice and conscientization. Those of us in positions of influence must be the voice of those who struggle to be heard or whose stories may seem just too ordinary. We must articulate and bring to the surface what we know in our hearts and minds. We must be actively engaged to ensure policy changes that would enable women to function more effectively. At the macro level, we must push for gender-segregated data and for the inclusion of gender in economic indices, or measurements of global competitiveness. For example, the Fraser Institute, which comes up with the annual Economic Freedom of the World, or EFW Index, recognize that quantitative economic measures such as GDP have an inherent gender bias because they often fail to capture the economic condition of women. After adjusting the EFW index for gender disparity in legal rights, it became evident that in several countries, men and women face different sets of rules when it comes to owning property and participating in the formal economy. In fact, ignoring the gender factor in the calculation of the EFW could well lead to an overstatement of economic freedom. The results clearly illustrated how country rankings changed when one factors in gender. It was found that many countries dropped substantially in the rankings once gender disparities were taken into consideration. Within Aipac, I'm happy to observe that more and more women come to the meeting table to the point where representation has become more inclusive with many of the different working groups and among senior officials and ministers. But while it is encouraging to witness women economic leaders at the highest level, there is still a long way to go before women are fairly represented. When we contrast the photos of Aipac leaders meeting in 1993 with that of 2021, for example, you will observe that after those 28 years, an increase in the number of women leaders from none to a few. I'd like to think I've done my part in furthering the cause of representation. In 2019, I was the first woman to take on the executive directorship of Aipac. Similarly, when years earlier, I was appointed the Secretary General of the Malaysian Ministry of International Trade and Industry. Both these appointments generated a buzz, and rightly so because it was about time. But I've always been just a little uneasy whenever it is brought up because while it is a big deal to be the first woman anything, I look forward to the time very soon when that will not be the case. When we talk about women leaders, I think of the late great Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the second woman Associate Justice of the US Supreme Court, and one of only 4 in the court's 232-year history. Women, she said, belong in all places where decisions are made. To which she also added, it shouldn't be that women are the exception. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are here today not just to celebrate International Women's Day. It is yet another opportunity for us to remind ourselves and the world that our job is not done. Ultimately, the important work that we do will only peak when everyone can take a woman leader for granted in the sense that it is no longer something that is special, but something that just is. That is a barrier I hope we break soon. I wish you good luck and a fruitful summit.
Ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Okay, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we will now have a fireside chat with the Congresswoman Stella Quimbo, District Representative of Marikina City, 2nd District, the Republic of the Philippines. Congresswoman Quimbo was appointed Commissioner of the Philippine Competition Commission in 2016, where she served for 3 years, from 2011 to 2013. She was a Prince Claus Professional Chairholder at Erasmus University of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Dr. Quimbo also has an extensive research portfolio in the field of health economics, industrial organization, microeconomics, education, poverty, and public policy and regulation. She has attended a succession of both international and local academic conferences and authored numerous scientific and technical publications, one of which was acclaimed 2015 Outstanding Scientific Paper Awardee by the National Academy of Science and Technology. Today, she is the duly elected representative of the 2nd District of Marikina City and Deputy Minority Leader of the 18th Philippine Congress. Please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Quimbo, who is joining us online from the Philippines.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Congresswoman. Thank you very much for joining us today. As you know, we're talking about women in leadership. I think the Philippines actually has made some great gains in women in leadership positions, particularly in politics, like people like yourself as well. But there are still some very large obstacles in the way for extending their range and their reach in the country. But how would you go about trying to get more women like yourself into positions of power, both in industry and in politics?
Tempted to say that the way to do that is to have a more politically mature environment and perhaps some economic advancement, considering that, of course, affirmative action and very important things like childcare would obviously require resources. But in the case of the Philippines, we actually rank very high in terms of political empowerment. The WEF ranks us as I believe, number 33 in the world, which is pretty high. But we are a pretty young republic, and at the same time, we are lower to middle income. So it's probably beyond political maturity and having enough resources. I believe it has a lot to do with culture as well. So I believe that's the first obstacle that we need to work on. And number two, of course, maximizing participation of women in politics also requires understanding certain limitations and particularly the inherent limitations, because obviously it's quite difficult in, for example, traditional campaigning like what we have in the Philippines. It's very difficult to do that when, for example, you're pregnant. So childbearing, therefore, and child raising happen to be, unfortunately, obstacles. So, of course, as we proceed, and hopefully if for example, campaign standards would change, and with the advent of new platforms like digital platforms, that might, in fact, reduce barriers for women to join politics.
Subject. There was a recent research I've done, I think by the BBC actually, into distrust in female politicians. And it was showing there was quite a high degree of distrust for some reason, beyond me. Why do you think that is so, and how can we tackle that lack of confidence?
I think it's because we have not been able to tell the story of women leaders. Like, for example, in the case of the pandemic management, there's a study that would show that countries that are headed by women are those countries that have done better in terms of pandemic response. But not a lot of people would know this. And so I guess that's the first step, right? Being able to tell the story of very effective women leaders. I think that's the first step. And because I believe, I guess the traditional thinking is that politics is difficult, and women are just too delicate to be able to handle the difficulties of politics. But again, telling the story, right, giving more information about how effective women leaders are, I believe that will help a lot.
I'm not sure that Margaret Thatcher or Angela Merkel were very delicate as women leaders. You're actually a member of the House Representatives Committee on Women and Gender Equality in the Philippines. How important is it to get the women's aspect, the female viewpoint, into policy making?
So in the case of the Philippine Congress, there are about 28% of the congressmen are female. So that's a pretty good number. There's a study that would indicate that you need at least 30% for you to feel the presence of women. And so we're quite close to that. And women in Congress are, I think, quite active. So even beyond the Committee on Women and Gender Equality, women in Philippine Congress are quite active. And it would be good to share that in terms of leadership roles in the Philippine Congress, the women also handle a proportional amount of leadership, meaning if we are 28% women in Congress, 28% also of the committees are headed by women. So that's a pretty good number. But if you look at the 10 most important committees in Congress, unfortunately, those are all headed by men. So there's still some kind of a glass ceiling, in a sense, that we face. So, well, having said that, how do we bring in women more into the picture is, I guess, increasing the numbers. I guess it's a first step. And number two, having one of the speakers earlier said that we should actually have the men on our side. And I believe that that's also very important. And we're quite lucky. I'm quite lucky that I think the males in the Philippine Congress are quite gender sensitive. So personally, I don't feel a lot of discrimination really in our current work environment.
I think actually I'm right in saying in the Philippines you have a higher proportion of female politicians than any other country in Southeast Asia. And in fact, the World Economic Forum, I think, has placed you as the only ASEAN country in its top 20 for gender equality standards. So what is the success story for the Philippines? What is your recipe for this?
So looking at the three aspects, so it's political empowerment, education, I believe, as well as health. In terms of political empowerment, we've had 2 female presidents. We've had 2 vice presidents, including the current one. And then, as I said earlier, Congress and the Senate, that's about a third women. So we're good in that sense, but it might be good to point out that we have the lowest labor force participation in the entire ASEAN. So what am I saying? There are obstacles for women, particularly, I believe, child rearing and childbearing. And also the lack of perhaps childcare options. And so that's the reason for why many women opt to stay at home. But once you've hurdled that obstacle, the glass ceiling is not too low. I guess that's the Philippine story. So that's quite unique. And so that's the reason for why I believe we rank pretty high in that WEF index. And the other thing to point out is there's something very nuanced about our education outcomes. There are actually more girls in school, and girls do better than boys in school. I think it's also partly cultural that the males inherit the land and they end up tilling the land. They end up dropping out earlier than women because they're expected to till the land. Whereas parents feel that the only thing they can bequeath to their daughters would be schooling. And so they stay in school. And so if you look at wage data, the average wages for women are actually higher than men. But if you look at the specific categories for wages, wages of males are actually higher than women, except in 2 categories, which is one of them is in agriculture and the other is the armed forces. And it just turns out that if you take the overall average, women wages tend to be higher than male wages.
Do you think you need to have more policy interventions in the Philippines to actually help women get more advanced? You talked about the need for more childcare, for instance. Is there other plans afoot to bring forward policy and put in place more childcare?
I believe so. As I said, having a very low labor force participation rate, I think it's really related to childcare options. We have a lot of caregivers available, and that's because we have an excess of labor supply. So a lot of women work as caregivers. But obviously, what we need is an institutional response, like in many countries where, for example, you have daycare centers that are widely available to all and at highly subsidized prices. So that's one possible intervention. The other intervention is possibly some form of affirmative action might be good. Maybe in a form of, say, tax incentives, like perhaps corporations that would, for example, reach a certain threshold of women participation in higher management positions can perhaps be given some form of tax holidays. That's something that perhaps can be considered. That's nothing of that sort is in place at the moment, but perhaps can be considered.
Interesting idea. What about women helping themselves? Do you think sometimes, one of our speakers earlier was saying, you know, sometimes the tendency is to say, thanks, but no, I can't do it, or thanks, but I don't think I'm quite ready for it. Is there more that women can perhaps do to help themselves be more gung-ho going for things?
You know, I have a very simple tip. It's to be surrounded by like-minded people. The reason for why I am what I am today, or I am how I believe today, is because my mom raised me this way. You know, my mom in the 1960s studied abroad, was able to get a Fulbright scholarship. And after she earned her PhD, came home to the Philippines. Her PhD is in engineering. She went to the State University, applied for a teaching position at the engineering department. And what they tell her is, oh, you can't teach here. You're a girl. Go to the home economics department, which she did, and ended up teaching food engineering all her life. So I grew up with this story. And so I believe, so I was raised this way. And my mom sort of in a gentle way tells me this shouldn't be the case for you. So I was raised this way, and I happened to also marry somebody who's very progressive minded and very supportive. And again, I'm not going to be where I am today without his support. He's a very confident person, and so for him, we have almost the same ideas with respect to gender, and that it should not be a barrier to anyone's success. And at the same time, when I look at my friends, we think the same way. So I think that's a very simple tip that I can give all women, to like surround yourself with like-minded people. And when you have your own daughters, raise them that way, believing that gender should not be a barrier.
Excellent advice. Thank you much indeed. COVID-19, I think many of us feel that actually it set back women's rights and women's empowerment a bit, because a lot of the jobs that were hit hardest by lockdown were roles that women were performing. Was that the case in the Philippines, do you think?
Absolutely. So our education sector was very much hit. We're one of those countries that continue not to have face-to-face classes. So teachers are hard hit. Our tourism sector is still in the slumps. What else? Small businesses is, of course, very much affected, considering that many of them are unbanked and therefore are unable to avail of the loans being provided for by the government at subsidized rates. So, so that's the situation of women, very hard hit. But I am hopeful for responses government would provide for these sectors would also proportionately benefit women more than men. So I guess that's the way to look at it, looking at the glass half full rather than half empty. But the statement that more women are affected is absolutely accurate.
Thank you. I like your positivity on this one. I have one final question for you, which may be a bit unfair. Can we look forward to having a third female president of the Philippines?
Well, that's my hope. We don't know at the moment yet. The survey numbers don't say so at this point in time, but many are saying that there is some hope, considering that the inertia is there, meaning there's that trajectory. So, but at this point in time, it's still hard to say. But yes, I belong to the same political party as the vice president, and so I obviously support her candidacy. And for the best, she's very hardworking, so she continues to do everything that she can to convince more people.
Thank you very much. It was a bit of an unfair question to end with, but thank you very much, Congresswoman Quimbo, for your time with us today, and I wish you all the best for the future. Round of applause, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Humphrey, and thank you for the insightful discussion by Congresswoman Quimbo. We'll now proceed to the second panel for today. The second panel will discuss Leaving Behind a Livable World, building on this year's theme for International Women's Day, Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. This panel will explore the role of women in leading the effort on sustainability, achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, which is not only about climate change, but it's also about ending poverty and hunger and improving access to education to leave behind a world that's habitable for future generations. For panel 2, please join me in welcoming the panelists Ms. Corinne Tapp, President, Asia, Africa, and Middle East, Danone; Tanyalet Chalunsuk, Managing Director of Foodpanda, Laos. And joining us in person, we have here today Laura Holdsworth, Managing Director and Vice President, Asia Pacific, Booking.com. And finally, last but not least, Jessica Chiam, Founder and Managing Director of EcoBusiness. Moderating the panel will be Mr. Andrew Nader, Regional CEO, Asia Pacific Region, excluding China, and Public Policy from the World Gold Council. For our participants online, if you have any questions, please raise them on the Zoom Q&A platform, and we will discuss them shortly. Yep, if you can take the stage, please.
Good afternoon or good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us at this final panel. My name is Andrew Nader. I'm the Regional CEO of the World Gold Council, and I'm delighted to moderate this final panel on leaving behind a livable world. And before I do that, I'd like to thank the EU-ABC for reminding us that we can leave behind COVID by organizing so many in-person events over the last year. But turning to the topic at hand, dealing with climate change, it's one of the greatest global challenges of the 21st century, but sustainability and individual and corporate stewardship goes much beyond climate change. And in line with this year's International Women's Day theme, Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow, this panel will be looking at the contributions of women leaders on climate change and sustainability more broadly. And to discuss these topics, we have a range of leaders from different industries represented today. In no particular order, we have Corinne Tapp joining online, who's the President, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East at Danone. We have Laura Holdsworth, Managing Director and Vice President, Asia Pacific at Booking.com. Tanyalet Chalunsuk, Managing Director, Laos at Foodpanda, who's joining us online. And Jessica Chiam, Founder and Managing Director of EcoBusiness. Welcome all. Corinne, I'm going to start with a quick question to you. What can corporations like Danone do today to have a positive impact for the future, especially in the wake of a global pandemic? And what are some of the initiatives that you personally have implemented to not only make your business more sustainable, but to make the world more habitable for future generations?
Thank you, and really great being part of this panel. I'm hearing myself, by the way, in the background. I hope that's not going to be an issue. So I think we are all aware that the COVID-19 has had increasingly devastating impact since early 2020, and its impact has been manifold. I mean, on top of the lives lost and the major impact on the collapsing healthcare systems, in particular in this part of the world, there's a very big economic fallout across the globe. And for example, in this part of the world, in Southeast Asia, The region's 2020 GDP shrank with more than 4% overall. And we know that it's the small and medium enterprises that are mainly suffering from that. And we know that also in this part of the world, the small and medium enterprises are very much led by women. And maybe connecting it back with women in leadership, in particular around sustainability, because sustainability, yes, is about the environment, but it's not the same as environmentalism. Sustainability means that we are meeting our own needs without compromising the future generations to meet their own needs. And therefore, we need to look at sustainability in a very holistic way, which means not only about protecting the planet, which is definitely very important, but also looking at the social and economic resources that we need to protect. And this is connected very much with the topic of women, because the reality is that 70% of the poor people in the world are women and children. And we also know that COVID and the pandemic and the economic fallout has actually worsened the situation of women much more and brought it back to 2 years ago. So coming back to what corporations need to do is start to actively work on regaining back this balance and getting women back in terms of access and equity, and getting them back into the workforce and getting them back as part of our economical systems and our business systems. Now, in Danone, as you know, we have a big mission, which is to help to provide health through food to as many people as possible. And we do that within the framework of One Planet, One Health, because we are truly convinced that the health of the planet and the people are interconnected. And therefore, it is our task now to make sure that we are looking at how we can get back with women in our system to raise back their wealth, because we also know that investing in women means investing in their incomes, and with their incomes, they will mainly invest in education. And this will actually help to break the negative circle at the moment of poverty. So for us, we've had actually I have a nice example where it also shows that investing in women as part of your business system is actually also a way to make it resilient to crises like COVID-19. So for example, in Indonesia, where I'm based, we have invested for more than 20 years in a business that is called Aqua Home Service. And these are dedicated, exclusive aqua agents, so they sell the water to their neighborhoods. This is mainly run by women, and in that way they can have an additional household income whilst looking after their children. Now, in the COVID period, where basically people were afraid to go to shops or were not allowed to go to shops, actually they increased their business, and in a way, therefore, were able to protect the financial situation of their families and of their extensive communities, and at the same time also grew the business for us. So I believe that investing in women as part of your business system is supporting also driving sustainable business moving forward, and that this is now more needed than ever before.
Thanks, Corinne. And Jessica, if I could turn to you, perhaps you could tell us more about how eco-business is contributing to the sustainability agenda and ensuring that ASEAN member states and companies operating in this region put in place responsible practices.
Thanks very much. So eco-business is a news platform primarily, and we started back in 2009 at a time where sustainability and ESG issues simply weren't on the agenda. And I don't know if you guys have watched Don't Look Up, but I felt like the scientist where the media is coming and nobody's talking about it. Fast forward 12 years now, sustainability absolutely is at the highest agenda where we see it is on policy meetings, businesses are talking about it, but the rate of adoption and transformation is still far slower than we really need to be. And I think where we play a role is holding organizations and corporates to account, but then also kind of highlighting and fleshing out where are some of the policy difficulties that are happening. How do we actually create a positive regulatory environment for decarbonization to happen or for social development to happen that is in a sustainable manner. So we provide a lot of ESG advisory service, to businesses, to governments, to basically help them cement what kind of strategy they need to be implementing in ASEAN. And ASEAN has been, the fastest growing region. It has 4 megatrends affecting it that is all very tied to sustainability, climate change and dwindling resources. You have rapid urbanization, you have rising inequality, as well as the digital revolution happening. And so there's massive challenges in the region, but there are also massive opportunities. And I think that in some small way, we help businesses and governments make sense of what's happening. And then when you understand what's happening, then you can in fact change. So, I think that that's a small role that we play.
And have you seen much change recently or over the years? Is the debate perhaps refocusing? How's women's empowerment moving up the agenda from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so many things have changed, and when we saw the Glasgow Climate Pact, some 90% of GDP are now covered by net zero pledges, and that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago. And so there is this whole corporate momentum, but this target is quite far in the future. And in ASEAN, we've seen a lot of member states pledging net zero targets, but in terms of shorter-term targets and policy pathways, they're not quite there yet. So that's why it's important to have the discussion on how do we get there faster. In terms of women, I think they are disproportionately affected by climate change and sustainability issues. And that's why it's so important to have women participate in that decision-making. And as we've heard from the speakers before as well, this is super critical to better decision-making, as well as being able to, implement policies or business actions that benefit women and encourage their participation.
And continuing the theme of climate change, Laura, perhaps I could ask you a question on the climate impact of travel and long-haul flights and so on. And there's an increased demand for sustainable travel, particularly from women travelers. And I'm just wondering how you're addressing this at Booking.com.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. There is a big desire, and I think you just mentioned that sustainability is at the top of many agendas now, having been a discussion point for a long time. But now I think it's at an all-time high, and we're at a pivotal moment where we can capitalize on that. And we do see that even within our Travel Sustainable report that we did last year, 73% of travelers said that they will look for properties intentionally that have sustainable practices when they're traveling. And 2/3 have said that because of the pandemic, that they now feel that they will make more informed choices and that they will travel more thoughtfully. So we are seeing, even in the last couple of years, the pandemic has also changed the way that people are thinking. I think that also has a lot to do with people have been traveling domestically, they've been traveling in their own backyards, they see the impact of their own travel on the communities, and so therefore we are a lot more thoughtful. At Booking.com, we take it very seriously. We are one of the world's leaders in travel platforms, and therefore we know that it is not something that's nice to have. It is really our obligation, it is our responsibility to provide choices to our travelers, and that they want to travel sustainably. Therefore, we need to provide them with the options to be able to do so. Last year, November last year, we launched the Travel Sustainable Badge, and this has become one of the most inclusive travel labels in the accommodation space, because it really gives every accommodation the opportunity to give the visibility to what they're doing and what practices they've implemented, so that, again, the travelers can make the informed choices, kind of creating this virtuous cycle. The properties that are well informed, they know what to do. Some are on the start of their journey, some are further along, but they need to be able to get that out there and show it. And the travelers themselves are looking to be able to travel sustainably. So by creating this, already since November, we have 90,000 properties are already listed with the Travel Sustainable Badge, making it the world's largest label already. So we are taking it seriously, and we're wanting to make sure that we create this virtuous circle that allows travelers to make the choices. So.
Thanks, Laura. Turning to Danielle, who's joining us online. Platforms like Foodpanda play a huge role in stimulating economic growth, creating job opportunities, especially in the more online-enabled post-pandemic world. Foodpanda, you've just started your operations in Laos. How do you envisage its role in contributing to the country's sustainable development goals and on a wider scale, the ASEAN region?
Thank you, and allow me to quickly introduce about Foodpanda quickly, right? So Foodpanda is launched in Singapore in 2012, and we just celebrate our 10 years anniversary recently, about last month. So currently we operating in 12 markets, and Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar being the last 3 markets that was launched in 2019. We have a service in about 400 cities and 12 markets. 8 out of 12 markets in Asia is actually Asian member states. And if I were to look at Food Panda as a enabler for sustainable development goal in my country, I think I can break it down to three different ways. One would be for on women empowerment. So if what we are to look at the service that we provide in Laos, we know we have food, we have grocery, we have quick commerce that would allow small and micro SME business to thrive, and also to have an online channel to extend their services, not just local offline market. And that's especially true for Laos, because prior to Food Panda launch, e-commerce or online service is pretty much unheard of. So when we launched in Laos, I think we impact the economic in quite a prominent way, because it's such a strange timing, because we launched in 2019 and 3 months after that, this was COVID. So the post-pandemic even show a greater role of platform like us that help SME to still thrive and also survive during the pandemic. So that's in terms of service in general, right? But if fast forward after 2 years of operating in Laos, what I'm seeing here is that for women empowerment in general, we have this service we call Home Chef. Home Chef is literally enable women or stay-at-home mom or mother to earn income right at the comfort of their home. And through data, we saw that more than 75% of those are women. We do know that there are people who stay at home and become home chef partner with us, but more than 75 of those are women. So I couldn't imagine a better example of how a business can enable or empower women more than us. Even at the company level, out of those 12 markets, the majority of market, more than 40% are also female employees. And that's even more true for Laos, because more than 49% of our employees are women. And if you look deep into Food Panda as a tech company, this has even more impact, because we are literally a tech-driven, a data-driven company. And being able to hire this many women in a workplace says a lot about the opportunity that we open up in the market. Not to say that out of those 12 markets, Food Panda Laos, Thailand, and Bangladesh are all female leaders, managing director, myself included. So that in terms of women empowerment, right, that I'm seeing as a very sustainable way to empower the role of women in our market, or the market that we operate in. And then secondly, I'll look at it at economic impact with the SME. I already did talk about that a little bit, about how we help enable small and micro business to thrive during the pandemic. But if we are to look at Laos as an example, we are one of the first online business provider that expand to all 18 cities of Laos. So you can imagine in Laos, we have very remote area where people have very little understanding about e-commerce, about using apps, or even selling online. So by expanded to those remote or geographic area, I think we play a very important role in educating the market as well, in teaching not just women, but a market as a whole, to understand how we can help them help them grow, or help them survive the inevitable truth of this modern world. Eventually, things will move to a more digital-driven business, right? So these are one of the example as well. And if I was to look outside of my market, in Thailand, we know that during the pandemic, we invest more than 200 million Thai baht, or about 5.5 million euro, work closely with the Ministry of Commerce to help the SME or all our vendor partners to survive through discount in commission, and help them with voucher, and also way for them to thrive during the pandemics. So these are some of the example that we enable MSME and also SME in all the market that we provide service in. And then lastly, I'll look at the riders part, because if we're looking at freelancer or job opportunity, the rider market that we provide is so easily accessible, and it allows equal opportunity for all. As long as you have a vehicle, a mobile phone, then you are able to start a job within a day. I mean, I couldn't find a better example of how business can create so many jobs in such an easily accessible way, and these are some of the examples that we are viewing ourselves as create an impact in an economic, in a more sustainable way in all the markets that we operate in.
Thank you. Daniel, I'm going to stay with you for the next question. You've spoken in the past at interviews about your own experience of schooling and education in Laos and then in Australia. And we know that a huge part of the economic development imperative of ASEAN is investing in education and skills for children, particularly girls. And I'm just wondering, what are some of your suggestions, given the experiences that you've had in uplifting girls in particular and providing them with equal access to opportunities so that they don't perhaps lose out compared to their peers in other markets?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Laos, and I remember in high school, I've never seen a PC, but that is more on a market, a country situation at that time, right? So there's no blaming in terms of educational system or anything like that. But I was also, lucky enough to be raised in a family where my parent was very supportive of female or of daughter to have as high as education as I can. And I know from a very young age that I'm interested in science and I want to study, computers and all that. So after graduating in high school, I did a lot of, science study, like extra curriculum or projects that would help me understand more about computer and all that. And then after that, I applied for scholarship to study overseas. And I was fortunate to be granted with the Australian Aid Scholarship. And I graduated with a Bachelor of Computer Science. And a few years after that, I also applied for a master's degree in the US through Fulbright program. And again, I was fortunate enough to be granted another chance to further my study. So this really helped shape me or give me the opportunity that I don't think other young girls would have opportunity in the same situation. So I was fortunate that way. And taking back of this advantage, what I can do as an individual or as a leader at this time, right, is to continue to raise awareness and continue to mentor all of the young girls in our organization, and also be involved in any event that would help empowering women in all the possible opportunity that I can. And this is be one of them. So I think we have a long way to go from raising like equality for all gender at this point. But I always say that it has to start with ourselves. It has to start with women themselves or anybody in the society to, I think, do their part, the best of the part. If you're parents, you teach your children to understand more or aware more about this bias, unconscious bias. And if you are a male colleague or a female colleague, then you teach each other more about this. You speak up a little bit. So everybody play their own part, in raising this awareness and this unconscious bias. And hopefully, only with time. My generation is already better than my parent generation. So I'm really hoping that my children's generation would be much, much better. But if you were to look at, if I were just to share my personal view or experience, that would be what I can do to help that, to help the women of the generation come after me would be in a better situation than myself.
Thank you. Just a reminder to everybody who's joining us online, you can ask questions, just use the chat function. And also I'll be opening it up to the floor shortly. So do think about some questions for the panelists. But before I do that, I'm just going to turn back to Laura and pivot to the impact of COVID, which has hit the travel and tourism sector particularly hard. And we know that women make up more than 50% of that sector and have been therefore disproportionately affected by the impact of COVID. And as the travel industry rebuilds, how important is it to put women, both travelers and workers, at the forefront and center of recovery efforts?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely vital. I mean, we're super excited to already start to see some levels of recovery, right? I think that's the first thing. We are starting to see already in the last couple of weeks, even this week with Malaysia announcing its openings, a slew of announcements over the last few weeks across Southeast Asia, even with Australia opening a couple of weeks ago. So we're starting to see great movement in terms of where we're at with COVID. We've still got some ways to go, but it is great to at least get started. And we do see, even in our searches, that as borders open, the search is there, the intent to book quickly moves to action. And you're right, more than 50% of the tourism industry is women, and therefore we do have an obligation to make sure that it doesn't just recover, but it recovers in the way that it should, so that we can continue to support these women. We know that in certain areas that tourism, the roles give women the empowerment, it gives them independence, and it gives them a livelihood that they may otherwise not have been able to have. So there has been a significant impact for them, and again at Booking.com we take it very seriously in our responsibility to help to drive traffic back to those areas. So we are making sure that we again bring in the international travel, for example. That is a very big focus for us as borders reopen, because we know international travelers stay longer, they spend more, and they also come at different peak seasons than the domestic travelers would. So it gives an opportunity to recover and therefore support the women in these areas. I think we also want to try and support accommodation of all sizes. We know that, again, tourism provides these women the opportunity to provide either opening their homes or opening small accommodations. So we want to make sure that there is a platform there for them to provide, to open their doors again. And we are seeing more and more listings coming back on that may have dropped off over the last couple of years because they were not able to survive during that period, but we're seeing good traction there. So yeah, we are trying to do our part to encourage the tourism back so that we can bring those livelihoods back.
Thank you. Jessica, question for you. Where do you see women playing a greater role in influencing the sustainability movement? How are women leading the agenda, and how important is it to ensure that we have a stronger view from women on setting the overall sustainability agenda?
Thanks for the question. You know, I think people have this conception that women care more for sustainability, and I think it's true. But I think it's also because we, I guess, have a nurturing nature that kind of looks at things holistically. And it's also proven that when you put, women in the boardroom, for example, there's actually better decision making. You take less environmental risks. You're at less likelihood of, environmental litigation and things like that. And so, the point I made earlier was that we really need women in leadership positions and to be driving these sustainability movements. We run an initiative called the Livability Challenge with Temasek Foundation, and it provides $1 million grant funding to a sustainability solution in the areas of decarbonization, circular economy, food and agri-tech. But overwhelmingly, it's still more than 80% of the founders are male. And so it's quite interesting because women, I think, care for sustainability issues a lot more, but when it comes to effecting decisions or building businesses, they're not given the same opportunities. And you see overwhelmingly still that it is men who are running enterprises. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course, but the whole point is how can we then support this ecosystem to enable women founders, for example, to start up sustainability enterprises for them to gain funding. I spoke at another event this week, and it was a initiative between the Sustainable Future Fund, of which I'm a managing partner, and another VC fund, Wavemaker Impact. And 2% of VC money went to women founders last year. 2%. And I think that in Southeast Asia, that figure was something like 17%, which is very encouraging, but it's still far, far below what it should be. And so there's a very obvious funding gap, and also a gap in terms of women in leadership positions, not just in, basically being CEOs or running their own businesses, being entrepreneurs, but also in government positions, also in boardrooms, in government agencies. And, I think that ASEAN has done quite a great job, putting females in, decision-making bodies, but I think there's still a lot more of this gap that we need to address.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask the same question to all of our panelists. So, Karine, joining us online, same question. How important is it to have a woman's perspectives at the leadership level, especially in driving the sustainability agenda, and how can we make the influence of women much more stronger at the leadership level? And what sort of action should companies, for example, be taking?
Yeah, I think, it's absolutely crucial to have women at the leadership level and at all levels in the organization, and in all the organizations that we're working with as a company, because only then we get a better balanced decision making. And I think it's coming back in terms of what would stop women to reach these positions. And because I think, first of all, it starts with providing equal opportunities and really encouraging an environment where women have access to jobs, to capital, as was just said, to providing incomes, to starting businesses and all of that, and making sure that we have equality in the decisions around those allocations of funds, but also to roles. But then I think if we look as Danone also internally, we know that and I've also learned over the last number of years, really studying, let's say, the topic out of personal interest of women leadership, is that women do need an encouraging and a supporting environment. And obviously this is very different culture by culture, but it's like a global truth. And in particular in the period around maternity, because this is also a period where a lot of women drop out of their jobs or decide not to take a next step. And as a company or as an organization, it's really important. And I think this is also what Mrs. Stella Quimbo just said as well. We need to make sure that we support women in this very critical period to be more flexible, but also to make sure that we provide facilities for them when they come back to work. So in the case of Danone, a number of years ago, we launched a global maternity policy to provide 6 months of maternity leave to every woman around the world that would go through maternity, which is often much higher than the local regulation would suggest. And also giving leave to the dads, because they are as much as important as part of the support system for women as well. But then it's not only that, when they come back to work, making sure that flexibility is in place, that women can continue to breastfeed, which is very important, by having the proper lactation facilities in place. So this for us has become really crucial as part of supporting women in that very critical period of their life journeys. But then also, I think on top of that, it's about what do you do in your ecosystem? So how do we provide opportunities, business opportunities as part of our ecosystem that provide women with jobs, but also provide women with an opportunity to raise the wealth and health situation of their family and their communities. And at Danone, we are lucky that we have access to a number of innovation funds, such as Danone Communities, ecosystem funds and livelihood funds. And these are all meant to kickstart projects that are really supposed to be helping sustainable and inclusive development. And the KPIs also include how many jobs are raised, how many women, female in particular, are able to join the workforce. And we have fantastic examples around my region where this has really helped to provide more sustainable economic future moving forward. So in Africa, for example, where we have large dairy businesses and where access to milk is crucial, but where you don't have these large mega farms, but often very small farms with only 2 to 3 cows. Most of these farms in Egypt and in Morocco are led by women. And sometimes their kids have to help because they can't afford to have staff supporting them. So through the help of these funds, we actually teach these women to become better farmers, better entrepreneurs, as a result having higher quality and higher quantity of milk, and therefore being able to actually earn more, be able to employ staff so their kids can have access to education, and be able to invest in more cows, so to become, let's say, a little bit bigger farmers. And this has been an incredible and very sustainable model for us that has really helped us also in our business. And then in Indonesia as well, I talked about that before, but not only the aqua home service, also as One Planet, One Health is so crucial for us. Circularity of packaging has been a big purpose of objective for us for many, many years. In Indonesia, like in many countries in Southeast Asia, the waste management is not a formal sector, it's an informal sector. And you would not be surprised, but there's many women in that space as well, because it does provide them with an income. So in 2010, we started actually building up recycle business units to recycle, collect and recycle the high quality PET bottles. So we could put them back in our PET bottles, and starting already to have these recycled bottles since 2010. As a result of that, these women became part of the formal economy, started to run these recycle business centers that are now completely independent and owned by them and making a profit. So through this kind of models, there is an opportunity to not only do something good, but also provide better opportunities for women, and as a result also provide better business for yourself, but also better business for them, and creating opportunities for them to have a stronger livelihood and invest in their children. So I think the investment in women in your company, but also in the networks that you're working with, is extremely crucial. And this is a very important task, and will, in the end of the day, benefit everybody as part of the ecosystem.
Thanks, Corinne. Same question to you, Daniela. How do we strengthen the representation of women in leadership positions, and particularly the influence over the sustainability agenda?
So I think I did mention a little bit about our employee share in terms of we have more than 40% of employees who are women. So the company in general did put a lot of effort in terms of hiring opportunity, enable hiring an equal hiring opportunity. And if you look at especially tech-driven sector like us, but maybe allow me to switch gear a little bit on how we view technology as an enabler for a more inclusive society. So granted that women in a leadership role is very important, but what we are seeing as well is that how technology enable those kind of empowerment. So it's inevitable that now that technology would continue to change and continue to impact our life in so many different ways. And the fact that we are able to do something with our product or our technology that enable that change, I think it does help in terms of long-term digital inclusive, and also help enable women to understand more about technology as well. So if I was to give an example in our application, right? So if we probably want the first who have this cuddly talkly. This one say a lot about how we care about environment in general, but without the technology, we can't do something so quick and so simple, yet create such a big impact on the restaurant scene by just allowing a customer to toggle whether you want a plastic cutlery or not. Or another example would be the green label that we implement in some of our restaurant partners that help people have a more conscious choice in choosing their product, also through technology that enable this. And even at the rider side, right, where we try to have a more efficient way of stacking our orders. When riders are in the same direction, they're able to pick up many different orders and drop off at many different drop off. And again, without advancement in technology, this wouldn't be possible. So if I was to view this in the long term, technology not just changing our life, it helped us make a very conscious choice in our consuming behavior, and it does raise awareness in terms of sustainability. And at the same time, having that technology also allow people to understand more, and knowing that they can carry themselves in, or they can educate themselves in the area where it's more important in the future to know or to learn about, say, technology, programming, or field that related to technology, would also support them to grow and to sustain for a more long-term sustainability.
Thank you. Laura, your perspectives on this?
Yeah, again, I think it's absolutely vital that we have female perspectives in every part of our business, whether it is related to sustainability, whether it is any part of our business, we should have equal representation. And I think that is very critical. I feel very fortunate. I've been the first female to take my last 3 leadership positions within Asia Pacific, within Southeast Asia. And that with that, I feel very fortunate to have now a sense of responsibility to make sure that I continue to inspire those that see now that that is possible. So, I take it very seriously, the position that I'm in, and that I have the opportunity to now mentor, support, and sponsor those females that are looking for the opportunities that I have been fortunate to have. And again, we've heard a lot today, and I've been very inspired by what I've heard, but also shocked by some of the numbers. And that is something that we need to continue to change. I think Dr. Deborah said it best earlier in one of the earliest presentations, was that females are generally saying thanks, but I think this has really resonated with me today. I know I've been guilty of it, and now in a position where I can continue to inspire my teams, but also provide the opportunities. This is something that I'm going to continue to use. So thank you for sharing that. I think it was really inspiring. Across my team right now, I do feel lucky that I have equal representation in my direct leadership team across Asia Pacific, and about 70% actually in all levels of leadership in the region. Now that's been a conscious choice to shift it from, it was significantly lower. I mean, I've not been with Booking as long, but that was a conscious choice. But now to say that we're not trying to drive it for the purpose of only driving women into the business, because diversity is obviously critical. We should not be, and I think Chris even raised it in one of the last questions, is it positive? The positive bias or positive change when we go potentially too far, and we ultimately need ideation. We need to be able to create inclusion for really better business decisions. And even as we look at the sustainability agenda, I mentioned what Booking.com is doing globally, but even in the region, again, I take it even more responsibly than we do it globally, because I think within the region we have more opportunities to make an impact. I think we have more delicate societies, more delicate communities that we need to support and we need to grow. But as I looked at building the task force for the various angles of our sustainability strategy, it was a very equal mix of our teams that put their hands up to own these topics, so male and female, which again, I was incredibly pleased to see. So I think that, and actually we had this discussion yesterday in the team, and one of the points was, well, women are typically more empathetic, so of course they lead a different agenda. But I think that's also changing, and it's, with the inclusion of women, I think men are also realizing the opportunities and driving that same agenda. So I think it's critical that we have full diversity, but we need an equal seat at the table to make a difference.
Thanks, Laura. This is always risky, especially at the end of a conference, but I'm going to open it up to the floor to see whether there are any questions. Claudia.
Thank you. To question the role for female in leadership. So it's quite a broad discussion, really.
Thanks, Claudia. So just to summarize, I think there's two questions there. One is how do we, I guess, nurture girls in particular when they're growing up to be prepared for leadership roles, and a more broader question on what constitutes a good leader. Jessica, do you want to start?
Very difficult questions. I have a son and a daughter, and my son likes to cook, and my daughter doesn't. You know, and I kind of cite that example because I think there are gender stereotypes, right, that are cast on both males and females. And I think that how society has changed now is that we are quite aware, I think, you know, of that kind of stereotype and how that constrains people when they're young. And so when, you know, I think about that question, you know, girls have to be gentle and this, and then yet they have to be bold. I think they can be anything they want. They should be encouraged to be anything they want. And if their decision is to stay at home and look after the children that makes them happy, they should be encouraged to do that. But if their desire is to take up a CEO position in a Fortune 500 company, then they should be supported to do that as well. And so I think, you know, these stereotypical notions are not very helpful. And I think that, you know, the positive trend that we've seen over the years is that, you know, girls, women now feel like there are less glass ceilings to break, I suppose, and they're more equipped with tools and the resources to kind of take those positions. And then on the broader question about what makes a good leader, I totally agree with that. And, you know, Chris had mentioned something about positive discrimination earlier, and there are a lot of discussions around quotas, you know, putting females into leadership positions because they are female. I don't think that that's a credit to, you know, to females in general. And really, what makes a good leader really should be on its own merits. So while quotas and positive discrimination and all these legislative moves are good, I think we really need to be thinking about the qualities of what a good leader needs to have, and then encourage them in both females and males. And so I think that this is a positive sign. We've seen SGX, you know, just a few months ago, now mandating listed companies disclose on diversity and inclusion, and that had never happened before. And so I think, you know, whether it's regulators or boards or governments, you know, they're all looking at this issue very seriously.
Thank you. Laura, your perspectives.
I agree very much with Jessica. I think that it is very tough, and actually I like the example you used there of the 2-year-old girl that is expected to be both. In theory, we should put then the same expectation on the boys. Now, if we have always said the girls need to be caring, now the boys need to be caring, right? They need to be bold, the boys should stay bold. I think we also need to be mindful that we don't put the boys into the opposite position where they also feel now that they're discriminated against. And so I think that we have to be very, very careful. But I think we have to give the space to girls, women of any age, at any point, to make sure that they have the space to do exactly what they want to do. And again, I feel a sense of responsibility to give sponsorship to the females that I have in the team that want to have the opportunity to grow. Then it's important that we sponsor them and give them the space to do it. So not just mentor them in, go be bolder, go be stronger, go be more assertive, but actually give them the space to just show the strengths they do have, because we have a lot of skills. We don't have to be somebody else. And somebody that I admire very much is a female co-CEO of a previous company I was at. And she said, "I'm unapologetically me." And that has also really stood out to me. She said, "I tried previously to be more masculine. I dressed down. I played my part to get to the boardroom, but I realized I was not playing to my strengths. My strengths, I felt confident when I was dressed a certain way. And for her, she was always immaculately dressed in a beautiful dress with her hair and makeup done. And it's not to say that's what you have to do. You have to be what you're comfortable being." And so her point was, I'm unapologetically feminine, but I can be as bold and as powerful and as assertive when I need to be, but my strengths come from within. And so women need to double down on the skills they have and not focus on what they don't have.
Thanks, Laura. Tanya Ellett, your perspectives, please.
Can you repeat the first question, sorry?
Yeah, the question was what constitutes a good leader, and how can we nurture young people, girls in particular, to I guess, have the right skill set, confidence to be the leaders of the future and to reach their full potential?
Right. I think in my perspective, I also have a young daughter of 4 years old. And I think I give her a full freedom of choice of choosing what toys or what color that she likes. I don't particularly buy pink color clothes or toys for her, but I would ask, which one you want or which one you prefer. So this is like one of the example, how would you empower their decision making rather than just, you have to be a leader, but maybe just be comfortable in their skin, just like all other panelists already mentioned. But I couldn't agree more on allowing them to have choices and be comfortable in what they want to be. But if you were to ask me to nurture girl to be leader, I think the most important environment is always a home, a family, right? So they look up to their mom, they look up to their dad, and it's how you would project yourself as a leader for them to see. And that's also lead me to the second question of, what is my view on a good leader? That's such a hard question because every leader in every role have different strength and different weakness. And for me, if I was to look at it, it could be very a cliche statement like, you lead by example. You be the person that you want to be, you want to work for. So that's how I've been carrying myself. I try to be the boss that I would ask myself what kind of leader I want to have. So I try to behave that way.
Thank you. And finally, Corinne, your perspectives.
Yeah, I think maybe connecting it back with the current era that we are living in. I mean, on this side of the world, we're still, let's say, surviving impact of COVID-19, still in and out in some of the countries. At the same time, the next crisis has already emerged, obviously, in Europe and Russia and the Ukraine. So the world that we're living in is so unpredictable and so violent. I think if there's anything clear, is that what the world needs is a very, very bold, courageous, but authentic leadership that is able to navigate in these times and that can actually drive business as a force for good and to bring sustainable and economical development, and which also means inclusive of women. And I mean, as a company, we have been guided in our goals with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. They were mentioned quite a number of times today. And I think this is a fantastic framework to see how you can operate, but also make a positive impact. And but as leaders, we must continue to lead this very, very actively to balance profit, purpose, and planet. And maybe people have heard about the B Corp movement, which is a movement that is pretty young, but actually growing very fast also in this part of the world, which is basically companies that have been validated and audited by a third party for using their business and their resources as a force for good. And this is important, and this is what the world needs. So if there's anything when it comes to what a good leader looks like, I would more talk about what good leadership is needed at this point in time. And this is courageous, bold, and authentic leaders that use their businesses as a force for good, and as a result, drive sustainable and economical development. I'm a mom as well. I have 4 children, 3 boys and 1 girl. And I mean, for me, what I would like to showcase and role model to them is that everything is possible for every one of them, regardless their gender, and that the possibilities are there as long as you have a passion and a purpose, and of course have the luck to have a supporting environment. So as women leaders, but as male leaders, we need to create these supporting environments where all people can thrive and get the max out of the capabilities that they have. And that's what I would say is what we as leaders need to do.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time, so just one final quickfire question to each of the panelists. In your views, what is the single most important thing that we should do, either individually or corporately, to ensure that we leave behind a more livable world? Jessica, I'll start with you.
That's a tough question. I'm going to cite something I saw on LinkedIn recently, which I really like, and that is, let's not celebrate women for International Women's Day. Let's pay them, or hire them, or deploy them, or basically just empower women, not just celebrate them. And I think that if we do that, then we have a really good chance of leaving behind a sustainable world. Thank you.
Laura, your recommendation?
Put pressure on. I like that one. I think that's great. I think that in everything we do, we should make it better. I mean, if I come from the travel perspective, we should leave a place better than we find it every time we visit. So I think that for females also, we should give the space, the opportunity, and make sure that we leave them feeling better than potentially we found them.
Thank you. Tanialet, your number one recommendation. Sorry, I think you might be on mute.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah. So, because being in this position, right, as a country manager, as a managing director of a company in the tech industry, also in food delivery business. So, if I were to look at how we would function in a way that we still live a livable way, then I was fortunate to be part of a company where our parent company care a lot about all these sustainability goals. And we constantly working with partners to improve, say, sustainable packaging is one of the programs that we are working. We invested on that business in order to give it to our partner at cost for them, so that we can somehow reduce wastage. And through technology, I already mentioned briefly about the cutlery taco. And we also invest in some of the culture meat where we try to be carbon neutral. So all these initiatives say a lot about our leader at Delivery Heroes, who's our parent company. And as a small entity in the Apac, that's what you can be proud of. Working with a company where that they don't just come to your market and go. They look at the long-term sustainability in your market, and also for the world and environment in general. And that's what I'm very proud of, and I'm continue to be happy and wake up and deal with issue and not feeling burnout, because I know that everything we does in the market would not just impact at current time, but for the future sustainability, and that's what we drive every day.
Thanks Tanialet. And last but not least, Corinne, your perspectives.
Yeah, I mentioned before that we have our goals, our company goals, in line with the UN SDG. They basically are covered by 4 areas: so impact people's health locally, preserve and renew the planet's resources, and trust donors to create new futures, and foster inclusive growth. If I take the 3rd area, entrust the Danone people to create new futures, this is very, very crucial. If you empower your leaders and your people to really take the mission of your company to the max and empower and entrust them to do the right things, things are just amazing to happen. Danone announced 10 years ago, I think it was, or not even 10 years ago, slightly less, that they wanted to be B Corp globally by 2030, to have all our businesses around the world B Corp certified by 2030. By entrusting the leaders of the countries, they were so excited about it that now already more than 60% of our global turnover is covered by B Corps, and that we have changed our ambition from 2030 to 2025. I think it demonstrates that if you empower people, give them the means, give them the trust, they can create the futures that we need for our children and for our grandchildren. And to make that also more personal, I believe that it's very crucial as a women leader, but also as a leader in general, that your values and purpose are in sync with your companies, because then you will come to your job every day with the greatest amount of passion and commitment to make it happen. I am a nature person. My hobbies are scuba diving and horse riding, and I'm obsessed with seeing how we as a company can not only drive fantastic business, provide healthy food and healthy hydration, but also doing that by reducing significantly the waste to landfill and becoming fully circular by 2025. So this would be my statement and my input, and I'm very optimistic. I think if we are all more committed to a purpose and find the organizations that are aligned with that, we can absolutely together make the difference.
Thank you, Corinne, and thank you to all our panelists for a great discussion, and that concludes the final panel of today. Thank you to the audience, both in person and online, for joining, and to the EU-ABC and the team for putting on this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our panelists and to our participants for a fruitful discussion. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of the inaugural EU-ASEAN Business Council Women in Leadership Summit. On behalf of the Council, we would like to extend our sincerest thanks for your attendance in the event today, both to our online audience as well as to those who are here with us. Wishing you the very best of health and have a pleasant evening ahead until we see you again. Thank you.